WVEC TV, Hampton.
Here we go.
This is Jeff McKay, ABC News.
The Battle of Hampton Roads fought on March 9, 1862, between the two ironclads USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia, formerly known as the USS Merrimack, not only changed the course of the Civil War, but the future of every Navy forever. What follows is the extraordinary story of how the USS Monitor was built, its role in the pivotal Battle of Hampton Roads, and the amazing story of its discovery more than 140 years later. Within months of the start of the Civil War, both the Union and Confederacy were locked in a naval arms race, pouring millions of dollars into their ships and arms. As part of the Anaconda Plan, the Union Navy had orchestrated a bold blockade of every major southern port, spanning nearly 3,500 miles of coastline, raising the stakes for naval superiority. Stephen Mallory, the newly appointed Confederate Secretary of the Navy, knew that the only way to keep southern supply sources open was to break the blockade. He recommended building a Confederate Navy using the latest technology, which meant a fleet of ironclads. As the noose tightened on the Confederacy, they used their limited resources to craft a navy from older wooden ships, iron, and scrap metal. Following the secession of Virginia in April 1861, the USS Merrimack, which had been partially destroyed and abandoned by the Union at the Gosport Navy Yard in Portsmouth, was recovered and used as the foundation for the first Confederate ironclad, the CSS Virginia. In February of 1862, after nearly 9 months of construction, the CSS Virginia was launched from the Gosport Navy Yard, and she was a tough and formidable vessel.
Well, everyone knows that the Monitor was an ironclad, but it was more than that. It was an iron vessel. The ship it fought in Hampton Roads in March of 1862 was an ironclad. That is to say, it was a wooden ship, originally built as the Merrimack in the 1850s, and converted into a vessel that had essentially a fort, a wooden fort built on top of the superstructure. And then it was clad, literally, with iron. In its case, 4 inches of iron, 2 layers of 2-inch iron plate bolted on top of nearly 2 feet of wood.
The construction of the CSS Virginia was no secret.
Both sides were aware that the other was building an ironclad warship. There were virtually no industrial secrets in the 19th century. I mean, newspaper reporters wandered into the yard and drew sketches of these things and printed them in the papers and interviewed the people who were building them, and all of this was public information.
As work had progressed on the CSS Virginia, the Union knew that the ship would be a challenging opponent and that they had nothing that could match such a mighty vessel. In August 1861, Gideon Welles, Union Secretary of the Navy, created the Ironclad Board, a panel of naval officers who would solicit designs for ironclad warships and ultimately choose 3. Swedish-American engineer and inventor John Ericsson's dogged enthusiasm for new technology ultimately convinced the Ironclad Board to select his novel design. He even captured the imagination of President Abraham Lincoln as well, who was believed to have said to the board,
in typical Lincoln-esque language, it strikes me, let's see, what did he say? He says, it reminds me of what the girl said when he put her foot in the shoe. It strikes me there's something in it.
Although Ericsson's design for the Monitor was one of 3 contracts chosen, there were still some doubts. The $275,000 it would cost to build the Monitor would not be paid unless it was completed within 100 days and fully operational. To meet this deadline, John Ericsson had 8 foundries from Baltimore to Buffalo working at full speed on different parts of the ship, which were then sent to the Continental Iron Works in Greenpoint, New York for final assembly where the hull was being laid. One of the most unique elements of the Monitor was its revolving turret.
Now, Ericsson is not the first to come up with the idea of having a turret on a ship. There are examples of others who had thought of the idea of something round that would rotate and so forth, but he's the first one to produce a working physical model and, of course, finally, a working turret itself, and it was an enormous thing. It was 120 tons in weight. It was 21 feet across. It was 8 layers of 1-inch iron plates curved to fit and be bolted together, sat on a central spindle so that it could be moved in the direction of the enemy, and of course turned away from the enemy in order to load the still muzzle-loading guns that were inside it. So it was conceived from the beginning as to be a completely different kind of ship.
Other distinguishing features in addition to the revolving turret were the Monitor's small iron pilot house on the deck and its almost totally submerged hull, which included the first flush toilet on board a ship. When afloat, only 18 inches of the deck appeared above the waterline, giving it the appearance of what many called a cheese box on a raft. The Monitor was completed in a dazzling 98 days and launched on January 30th, 1862. And after a few weeks of fine-tuning, was commissioned at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. On March 6th, she finally set sail for Hampton Roads with a crew very new to iron ships for her historic battle with the CSS Virginia. Meanwhile, on March 8th, the CSS Virginia steamed into Hampton Roads. Her mission? To destroy the Union fleet blockading the harbor. Within 5 hours, she had devastated the Union fleet, destroying 2 ships, severely damaging 2 others, and causing 3 more to run aground, and inflicting more than 300 casualties. It was the worst defeat suffered by the U.S. Navy until the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor nearly 100 years later.
But in any case, the superiority of the Virginia over the wooden ships in Hampton Roads became so obvious on the 8th that all the other United States warships in the roadstead immediately thought, oh, well, we have no hope of standing up with this iron monster, and retreated to the protection of Fortress Monroe, or in one case, a couple of cases actually, ran aground trying to get into the coverage under the protection of Fort Monroe. And it's under those circumstances that the Monitor, under John Worden's command, arrived about 10 o'clock at night. That night, he came into Hampton Roads, visually being able to see the burning of the wreckage of the USS Congress, still on fire off Newport News Point. And of course, as soon as he tied up alongside the USS Roanoke, which was the flagship of the squadron, its captain, Captain Marston, was able to tell him of the disaster that was wrought by the Virginia in Hampton Roads that day. So he was under no illusions of what he was going to have to confront the next day.
And as March 9th dawned,
there was kind of a mist on the water, a little morning fog, and visibility was not 100%. But the CSS Virginia came back out again to finish the job it had started the day before.
her new commander was Catesby Jones, having replaced Franklin Buchanan, who had been wounded the day before.
His target is the USS Minnesota, one of those big wooden frigates aground on the 17-foot fathom line, 17-foot shoal. And he looks at it through the clearing morning mist, and he can see that there's some tugs alongside, apparently trying to pull it off into deep water. And there's something else there, too, and he can't quite figure out what it is until it separated itself from the Minnesota and began to steam under its own power in their direction. And only then, I think, did Jones realize what Worden knew from the night before, that this was going to be an historic confrontation between the first two ironclad warships that would meet one another in battle. So once the Monitor interposed itself between the Virginia and the Minnesota, Jones had really no choice. It screened him from the enemy ship. He couldn't get close enough to attack the Union fleet without taking on the Monitor. And of course, in the Monitor, Worden knew it was exactly his job to protect the wooden fleet.
Frustrated after pounding away at each other for several hours, the Virginia decided to try and ram the Monitor, but a steering malfunction caused her to miss her mark. In the meantime, a shell from the Virginia hit the pilot house on the Monitor and severely wounded Captain Worden. The Monitor stopped firing to regroup, and the Virginia believed the Monitor was retreating, so she headed back up the Elizabeth River. Lieutenant Green on the Monitor, seeing the Virginia steaming away, believed that the Monitor had won the day. And in 4 short hours, one of the most historic naval battles in U.S. history is over, with both sides claiming victory.
So, in terms of the outcome of the battle, a tactical draw to be sure, but a strategic victory for the Union because it was able to continue to use that body of water to do the things it needed to do to be successful in the war.
Less than a year after its launch, and only 9 months after its historic battle on New Year's Eve, 1862, as it was being towed by the USS Rhode Island, the USS Monitor sank in a moderate gale off the coast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, in what is now called the graveyard of the Atlantic. 16 men went down with their ship. The last thing that anyone recalls seeing as the Monitor went down was a red signal lantern. For more than 100 years, the location of the Monitor's wreckage haunted historians. Then in 1973, the USS Monitor was discovered, and in 1975 was designated as the first national marine sanctuary under the auspices of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. In 1977, the first dive was made to investigate the wreckage, and the first relic that was brought up was a red signal lantern. In 2002, nearly 30 years and after dozens of expeditions in which hundreds of artifacts were recovered, the largest, most dramatic mission to recover the USS Monitor's turret began. The floating command center of the operation was set up on the derrick barge Wotan. At 300 feet long, it was like a small town with its giant crane, portable lodging, command center, and equipment for archaeologists, engineers, and divers who would be working on the barge for the next month and a half without a break. Time, money, and weather were all factors in the race to raise the turret. Captain Bobby Scully oversaw this massive 45-day around-the-clock effort.
Because we were going after the turret was a lot more complicated and therefore more challenging than probably the previous expeditions. And several of the really large challenges that we faced, of course, were the environmental conditions. The fact that we're operating off the coast of Cape Hatteras in the middle of the Gulf Stream, in deep water, 230 feet of water. All of those environmental factors make it a more challenging diving operation and also a more challenging salvage operation.
This elaborate recovery project required the expertise of not only surface supply divers, but of saturation divers as well, who spent an average of between 10 and 12 hours in 230 feet of deep water by breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen.
Well, the Navy's big contribution to this was that we brought the salvage expertise and the salvage manpower to this wonderful triad that I call the partnership between the Mariners Museum, NOAA, and the Navy.
For years and years, people kept telling us you can't do archaeology with Navy divers because they can't do careful work. Well, we've proven them wrong time and time again, because we've got tanks and tanks and tanks of just beautiful Monitor artifacts undergoing conservation that were recovered with incredible care off the bottom.
A special 26-ton claw-shaped device nicknamed the Spider was specially designed to bring the 120-ton turret up from its resting place. But before divers could have any access to the turret, they would have to remove decking and a massive 45-foot armor belt secured around the circumference of the Monitor, which had flipped upside down when she had sunk.
That was a gauntlet of emotions. It was a lot of fear because we had some concerns about whether or not the roof was going to hold. And if we lost the roof, we were very likely to lose the cannons and certainly all the remaining contents inside.
And then the other large challenge was the fact that we needed to pick up this 140-year-old structure that was actually buried underneath the ship and get around it somehow to lift the weight of it without crushing it, without crumbling it, without damaging either the turret or the rest of Monitor, and lift it from 230 feet below the ocean. One of the problems was that we really only had one shot at it.
On August 5, 2002, as the world watched, the turret of the USS Monitor emerged from the depths of the sea and was safely placed on the Wotan.
The minute that the turret actually broke the surface of the water, and I knew that we were going to be able to get that wonderful artifact back to the surface safely, without hurting anybody and without damaging it, was such a relief.
The Wotan carried its precious cargo back to Newport News and the Mariners Museum, where this historical treasure hunt would continue. As it passed Fort Monroe with a small flotilla in tow, it was greeted by a 21-gun salute by the U.S. Army. In 1987, the Mariners Museum had the honor to be designated as the official principal museum for the Monitor collection of artifacts and historical and scientific data. When the turret arrived at the museum, it was placed in a specially designed conservation tank with a holding capacity of 90,000 gallons. It is now housed in the Monitor Center's wet lab, part of the 20,000 square foot wing at the Mariners Museum. It is the largest facility in the country for treating marine artifacts and the only one where the public can witness the process firsthand.
One of the coolest things about the Conservation Center is that it's always on public display. We didn't want to keep the Monitor artifacts hidden behind closed doors or curtains. We want people to be able to see the process that's going on. I mean, this is a national treasure and we're holding it in trust for the American people. And so we want the American people and everyone in the world to be able to see what's going on here. So you can view the conservation of the turret, the steam engine, the dogger guns, the condenser. We also have little webcams, so if you can't come to see us in person, you can check out our progress online.
Excavating the Monitor's turret back here at the museum has really been a fascinating and unique archaeological dig. It came back with about 2 to 2.5 feet of sediment in the bottom of the turret, which is pretty much where all the artifacts lie. And so we've had the privilege of excavating in a proper manner and recording everything that's found in the base of the turret. With iron and steel objects that have been in salt water for a long time, you get the type of oxidation or rust that you get on iron or steel that's in the air. But underwater in salt water, you get electrolytic corrosion as well.
Conservators are using a process called electrolytic reduction to restore the turret and other artifacts recovered from the ocean. The process removes a surface incrustation, rust, and chloride. But the craft of conservation is a slow one, and the turret will take between 15 and 20 years to restore.
Turrets, cannons, engines, propellers, all those large items from the Monitor, without the smaller artifacts, which put a human aspect on things. They really don't mean anything. All this linked together, I mean, we could tell the story of the Monitor with the small artifacts that we've recovered without having any of the large pieces.
And the next significant chapter in this story was the March 9, 2007 opening of America's premier Civil War attraction, the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum.
The idea for the USS Monitor Center was one that took a long time to really formulate. When NOAA started bringing us the artifacts in 1987, they were pretty small. We could measure them in inches and in grams, but suddenly they started being measured in tons. We realized in the late 1990s that we needed a bigger building. And so around 1999-2000, the Mariners Museum committed to building the USS Monitor Center conservation facility, and of course the exhibit grew out of that.
A visit to the USS Monitor Center is a trip to both the past and the future.
What we want people to learn when they come to the USS Monitor Center is a number of things, not the least of which is that it's not just about one ship. You could not have had the USS Monitor without the CSS Virginia. But we want folks to understand the history, the Civil War history of the Ironclads, the conservation that the Monitor is undergoing here, and of course the incredible discovery and recovery story that involves the Navy and NOAA.
As visitors walk the center, they experience the dramatic sinking of the Monitor and view the Red Lantern, the artifact that unites its past and present stories. Other galleries transport visitors back in time. A replica of the USS United States tells the story of the age of sail before the Ironclads. And a cobblestone path in 1862 winds through the Gosport Navy Yard as the CSS Virginia is under construction. One of the highlights of the center is the Battle Theater.
The Battle Theater, it's one of the most exciting things we have here in the Monitor Center. The Battle Theater is an homage to the old cycloramas that were traveling around the country in the early 20th century. It's a theater in the round, but it's got a 21st century spin on it. digital oil paintings, if you can imagine that. They appear to move, and we refight both days of the Battle of Hampton Roads. It goes on around you, it goes on over your head, and it's absolutely amazing. In 13 minutes, you'll find out more about the battle than you can ever imagine.
You can also take a stroll on a full-size replica of the USS Monitor.
The replica of the USS Monitor that we have here is full-size, and it was built for us by Northrop Grumman Newport News and their incredible apprentices at the apprentice school. It's a walk-on sculpture, if you can imagine, and it was used as a training tool for the apprentices at Northrop Grumman, so it's got a special place in their hearts and in ours as well.
A great deal of time and attention is also devoted to the recovery of the USS Monitor. An interactive theater allows visitors to experience the drama of the recovery effort, and you can also experience the turret as it was when it came up from the deep.
This is one of the most exciting parts of the exhibition. I'm standing in a recreation of the archaeological turret. This is a snapshot of a moment in time in the fall of 2002, right after the turret came here to the Mariners Museum. And we've recreated that archaeological site here. So I'm standing on the roof of the turret. It's actually upside down, as it is right now, even in our conservation tank.
The USS Monitor Center is a work in progress.
Well, one of the interesting things about building the Monitor Center exhibit is we had to build it for the year, say, 2017, not 2007, because so many of the artifacts that came up from the Monitor Wreck site are still undergoing conservation. Take, for example, the turret. That's going to be another 15 to 20 years, possibly. But that doesn't mean that we had to just say, well, we'll figure about that, we'll worry about that later. We had to build a support to hold the turret when it comes out of conservation. In the interim, we don't want to leave a great big empty hole in the middle of our exhibit, so we've created these incredible exhibition pieces that will help people understand how the turret was put together, how it worked, how the archaeological process went on. So there's going to be always changing things going on here at the Monitor Center.
We hope this small snapshot into the past, present, and future story of the USS Monitor will inspire you to visit the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum, an ironclad promise of adventure.